Welcome to the Rustic Garden. So this is my third video on starting vegetable seeds indoors. We're going to talk about starting your tomatoes and peppers. We're going to talk about when do you water them, how do you know to water them, and when do you feed them. In the next video we're going to start lavender and herbs. So let's get started with the question that I get asked very often. How do you know when to water your seed starts? Number one is you don't want them to always be overly wet and sitting in water, or you're going to run a good chance of getting diseases and root rot in your plants. So this is a starting mix right here that is hydrated. It's filled with water. They've been watered, and you can see how dark they are. Now as they start to dry out, the tops dry first, and the dry starting mix will start to look like that. The color is starting to lighten. This is a completely dry starting mix. You want to start thinking about watering when your starting mix, the top of your starting mix, looks just like that. You could water that day, that's perfectly fine. If your starting mix gets completely light, this is the color that it looks like in the bag, that's okay, but you're going to have to water that day. And what happens is the tops dry first, the moisture stays down here in the cells, in the bottom of the cells, so your plant's getting moisture. So you just eyeball it. As it transitions from dark, to a lighter brown, to completely light, that's when you want to water. I'm going to show you how I bottom water. I always recommend bottom watering. It's a lot easier. You just pour it into the tray. If you're watering on the top, you're splashing all kinds of stuff around and it's a mess. Now feeding your plants. And this is a question I get asked a lot. Organic or chemical fertilizer? And chemical fertilizers are basically processed by human beings. The truth is, everything in the world is a chemical. This is a chemical, this is a chemical. This will not harm you. Don't get so attached to the word chemical thinking that it's deadly poison. It's not. This is an organic fertilizer. It's perfectly fine. I like using organic out in my garden, in my earth beds, for this reason. This is usually made out of animal products like blood meal or bone meal, or plant products, cottonseed meal, different things that have to decompose and break down to make the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium available to your plants. If you put this into your starting mixes, because they're not fully broken down, other things like them too, like fungus. So if you're using the organics in your starting mixes, and if you can see all this white growing on here, let me move it around. That's fungus that is growing, because this is these are chives, or these are onions that are being started, and I used organic fertilizer. Fungus will enjoy the organic fertilizer. Now that fungus doesn't mean it's necessarily harmful to the plant, but you're going to get fungus growth. The other thing that can happen is that smell attracts fungus, gnats, and insects if you bring these inside and out while they're developing. And organic fertilizer will stink. This is a processed fertilizer. This is what I like using for my seed starts. If you put in the Job's fertilizer in here, mixed it up, made a gallon for a supply, after a couple of days this is going to smell and stink to high heaven. That's why I like to use the chemical fertilizers. Now when you're using them, in the last video I said it, you want an NPK that stays under a 555. This is a 312. That's fine if you want to use it. This is a 15-30-15. Cut it down. So I used about a quarter strength to bring this down as close as I can get to a 555. So we have the fertilizer in it. When do you feed your tomatoes and peppers? Once they germinate, break the surface, in about 10 to 14 days, that's when you want to give them their first feeding. They're going to survive off of the seed coat to start. The tomatoes here have been fed twice. They just got fed. They're about 5 weeks old, and they look pretty good. Now, it's too early to start my tomato and pepper plants here in Maryland, Zone 7. You want to start tomatoes 6 to 8 weeks before the outdoor night temperatures hover around 50 degrees, because they like the warmth. So if you're putting them out and the nights are getting cooler, not to frost where the plants kill, the tomatoes just sit there. You want to start your peppers 8 to 10 weeks before the night temperatures are going to be around 50 degrees, and that's just a general guideline. So let's just assume that this is at 2 weeks. We got 2-week-old tomato plants or peppers in there. This is the same way. If it wasn't a feeding time, this would just be plain water, and this is how I do it. Just fill up the seed tray to about a quarter of the way. The whole bottom should have water on it. Maybe a quarter, let's see. Yeah, a quarter of the way. And you can see that these are floating. That's enough water now, and I always leave one side open like this so you can just put the water in and it'll take care of all of these. As we go to planting, you're going to see these get a little bit darker, I think. Let me add a little more. So about a quarter of the way, third away. After 20 minutes of these cells sitting in here, whatever doesn't get absorbed, just dump out. But with practice, you get pretty used to how much water has to go in there. So this will all be absorbed through the bottom. So every 10 to 14 days after germination, feed your plants. That will give them enough fertilizer. All right, let's get to planting. Planting's pretty straightforward. Now I'm also planting these as if, you don't need massive amounts of tomato and pepper plants. You just want, half a dozen or 12 of each. Peppers, I put in 3 because sometimes they don't germinate as well as tomatoes. You could do 2 if you don't want to waste seeds. And I'm not going to plant all of these because, like I said, it's too early here. I'll probably start mine, the peppers I'll probably start at the beginning of April. There's only 2 in there. And the tomatoes I'll probably start middle of April. So once the peppers are in, you just put them on top, and then you're just going to press them in. Now I did a video where people, would always worry, well, how far do I plant them? I did this with tomatoes. I put tomatoes just right on the top with like a little bit of soil on top, press them down a half an inch, excuse me, and then press them down all the way to the bottom of the starting cell. And every single one grew perfectly fine. So you don't really have to worry too much about depth. Just press them in with a popsicle stick. Cover them with the starting mix. And the water's going to come up from the bottom. I like to use the popsicle sticks. Make sure you just label them red cherry, starting date January 2nd. That's all you need. We'll talk about germination for both of these in a second. Now the tomatoes, same process. These are indigo apples. I'm just going to put 2 seeds in there. I'm not going to do them all to just save some time. But just drop the 2 seeds down in each corner. And I just press them in about a quarter of an inch. And then you just drop some of your starting mix on top. And that gets your plants started. Now, again, in keeping this simple, you don't have to start with these starting trays. These are more for somebody who's going to have up to 72 plants in their garden. If you are just going to grow a handful of tomatoes and peppers, go ahead and use a cups like I showed you in the last video. Let's see, those are peppers. And you would do the same thing. Fill the cup up just like that. The benefit of doing this is once these tomatoes, get to this size over here, they have to get transplanted into cups. 3 pepper seeds. Just make a triangle. Now this one should have been tomatoes, but we'll just leave it. Pretend that's a tomato plant. Or tomato seeds. And just press these down about a quarter of an inch. Pack it down. And you have your peppers and your tomatoes. When these get up to about that tall, maybe an inch, just cut back the 2 that are the weakest. Leave your strongest plant. Let's get them out of there. And this is what you'll end up with. You have tomatoes and peppers, a single plant, growing in an 8-ounce cup. I don't know if you can see in there, but there's water. Same thing. Let's see, there you go. Bottom water from here, there's holes in the cups. Make sure you put holes in the bottom. and it just stays nice and clean this way. You're not splashing the soil around. It's not a mess. You can bring this in and out of the house if you want to acclimate them to the sun. You want them to get into the sun when it's warmer. You can do whatever you want. Put them right under your grow lights. But this is a perfect way to get them started. In another video, I was showing people how you could just skip the cups. Now those have 8 plants over there, but you could just put your plants in by seed into a container like this, and then we're going to cut them out and put them right into the garden. So there's a lot of ways you can start tomatoes and peppers indoors, and you can do whatever you see for a tomato, you can do for a pepper. The difference really being is tomatoes you're going to start 6 to 8 weeks before the night temperatures are about 45, 50 degrees, and you're going to do peppers 8 to 12 weeks before. Nothing is exact. You might even hear me say things a little bit differently. Just follow these as guidelines, and these guidelines will help you be extremely successful in seed starting everything indoors. Let me just make sure I covered everything. Alright, this is all you need to really get these going. For the lighting, we're going to talk about that. And in case you're getting started early, what I'm recommending is that once the tomatoes and peppers germinate and break the surface, give them 24 hours of light for 3 days. That will just really help the seed starts, the germinating seeds, be really, really strong. Now, when you put in tomatoes, tomatoes are going to germinate somewhere between 5 to 10 days when the temperatures of the seed starting area are 70 to 75 degrees. If you warm it up a little more, they're going to germinate quicker. Peppers tend to take longer. They take somewhere 7 to 15 days, and they like the heat in the general area to be 75 or 80 degrees. So don't worry if your tomatoes come up first and your peppers are sitting around, because they usually lag and come from behind the tomatoes. Hope you have a great 2017. I'm excited for the new year. Please check out my blog at www.therestedgarden.blogspot.com, and also check out my YouTube videos. Thanks.